Hello and welcome. In the previous lecture, we saw how to wrap an exception inside another exception. Also, we saw how to write a custom exception. In this lecture, we are going to see a very important topic, that is method overriding and exception handling rules. So, when it comes to exception handling and method overriding, there are certain rules which needs to be followed, and this is the area where a lot of interview questions come. So let's go through all the rules. First of all, the first rule says if a superclass method doesn't declare any exception, then the overwritten method can declare only unchecked exceptions but cannot declare checked exceptions, or it may choose to not declare any exception. So I'll repeat this rule again. If a superclass method doesn't declare any exception, then the overridden method in subclass can only declare unchecked exceptions but cannot declare any checked exceptions, or it may choose to not declare any exceptions. So let's see an example here. Here this is a superclass. In this superclass we have a method whose name is method, public void method, and it's printing super. See, it doesn't declare any exception. And we are having a subclass which extends the superclass, and we are here overriding this method. Now, as per the rule, the overriding method can throw unchecked exceptions. Here runtime exception is an unchecked exception, so it can throw unchecked exception. But it says that it cannot throw any checked exception. If you see it here in superclass, we have a method. It is not declaring any exception. So in the subclass, in the overridden method, you cannot declare any checked exception, but you can declare unchecked exceptions like runtime exception. Or the rule says if the superclass doesn't have an exception, then the subclass overridden method may choose to not declare any exception. So that is also fine, but you cannot declare any checked exception if your superclass method doesn't declare any exception. So let's see the next rule. The rule says if a superclass method declare a checked exception or a compile time exception, then the overridden method can declare any unchecked exception but can only throw narrow checked exceptions. We'll see what is that. Overridden method cannot declare any border checked exception. Overridden method can declare same exception or may not declare any exception. So this is how the rule says. I'll repeat that again. If a superclass method declares a checked exception, then the overridden method in subclass can declare any unchecked exception, but when it comes to checked exception in overridden method, it can declare only narrow checked exception, but it cannot declare any broader checked exception. Or it may choose to declare the same exception, or it may choose to declare not any exception. Okay, so let's see an example. In this example, the method here in superclass throws a checked exception, and here we are in the subclass, we are overriding this method, so it can throw the same exception. That is allowed. Whatever checked exception that was being thrown in superclass, same exception can be thrown in the subclass. In this example, you will see here the superclass throws an IO exception, which is a checked exception. So the subclass overridden method may choose to not throw any exception. So that is also fine. This is also correct. Superclass has a checked exception. A subclass overridden method choose not to throw any exception. That is also fine. Now here you will see the superclass method. Here the superclass method throws IO exception, which is a checked exception. But in subclass we are throwing exception. Exception is a broader exception than IO exception. So if you will see the hierarchy, exception comes first, then here comes the IO exception. So exception becomes the broader exception. So the rule says you cannot declare a broader exception. You can declare a child exception of IO exception, but you cannot declare a broader exception. So this will throw compile time exception. So as I was explaining, if the superclass method throws an checked exception, here in this case IO exception, then the child class method The overridden child class method can throw exception which are narrower than that is being thrown in the parent class. So in the parent class, IO exception is being thrown. So file not found is exception. File not found exception is a child exception of IO exception. So that is allowed to be thrown. So we'll see this is exception in the hierarchy. Then comes IO exception. Then comes file not found exception. So the rule says we can throw narrow exceptions. Also the rule says if the parent class method throws IO exception or a checked exception, the child class overridden method in subclass can throw unchecked exceptions like runtime exception or any other unchecked exception. So that is also allowed. Okay, so this is what the rule says. So now let's see the next rule. So the rule says if a superclass method declares a unchecked exception, then the overridden method in the child class can declare any unchecked exception, cannot declare any checked exception. Overridden method can declare same exception or may choose to not declare any exception. So this is what the rule says. I'll repeat that again. If a superclass method declares a unchecked exception like runtime exception, null pointer exception, then the overridden method can declare any unchecked exception but cannot declare any checked exception. And also the rule says the overridden method in child class can declare same unchecked exception or it may choose to not declare any exception. But the important point is it cannot declare any checked exception. So let's see. Here in the superclass, the method throws a runtime exception which is a unchecked exception. The child class can throw any other runtime exception like null pointer exception. This is allowed. Now if you'll see here in the superclass we have a runtime exception being thrown in from the method. In the child class exception we cannot throw any checked exception like IO exception. This will throw a compile time error. So this is not allowed. You have to remember this point. And if you see here in this example, the superclass method throws runtime exception which is a unchecked exception. So the child class can throw same exception